Parents gave my siblings $200K, excluded me. Then they begged for help after I became successful. Hey, I'm Michael, 27 years old. I guess you could say my whole life, I've been the one that got overlooked. I've got two siblings, my older sister Sarah and my younger brother Chris, and to say they were always the golden children is an understatement. It's like they could never do anything wrong in my parents' eyes. Meanwhile, I was just there, I guess. Growing up, Sarah was the perfect student, always getting straight A's, involved in all these school activities, and then she went off to some fancy Ivy League college. My parents were obsessed with it. I swear, from the day she got her acceptance letter, they couldn't stop talking about how proud they were. They threw her this big celebration party, invited all the family and friends. It was like we were having a second Christmas just for Sarah's academic success. Chris, on the other hand, didn't even need to try hard. Things just seemed to work out for him. He followed Sarah's footsteps and got into some fancy grad school program. My parents made sure everything was set up for him too. They covered his tuition, helped him move, got him a new laptop, you name it. And then there was me. I didn't get into any Ivy League school. I went to a state college. It was a good school, but I could feel that it wasn't something my parents would brag about like they did with Sarah and Chris. When I told them I'd gotten accepted, they kind of nodded and said something like, "That's great, Michael." But I could tell their hearts weren't really in it. No celebration, no party. I was lucky if we ordered takeout that night. I guess I tried not to let it bother me, but the older I got, the more I noticed just how different things were for me compared to them. It wasn't just the attention, it was the money too. Like Sarah's wedding? $200,000. No joke. My parents went all out. Venue, catering, the dress, everything. They treated it like the event of the century. I mean, they even flew some of our family in from out of state. For Chris, they paid for his entire graduate degree and helped him out with rent until he could get on his feet. Emily, the youngest, didn't even have to worry about student loans. They covered those too. But me? Well, when I was starting out in my career and needed some tools for work, stuff that was essential to even get going, I asked my parents for help. They gave me $7,000. Now don't get me wrong, $7,000 is a lot of money. But when you compare it to $200,000 for a wedding or paying off someone's tuition in full, it kind of stings. It felt like I was getting the bare minimum just so they could say they helped. And it wasn't just the money either. It was how every time we got together as a family, I felt like the odd one out. At family dinners, all the conversations were about Sarah's fancy job or Chris's latest achievement. They'd sit there talking about their vacations, new house upgrades, or whatever expensive thing they were planning next. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting there, eating my food, trying to think of something to contribute to the conversation. But honestly, what was I going to say? Hey, I just finished a big project at work and I'm still paying off my car. It felt like my achievements were just kind of small potatoes compared to what they were doing. I remember this one dinner in particular, maybe like a year ago. We were all sitting around the table and the conversation turned, as it usually did, to Sarah's latest vacation plans. "Oh, we're going to Europe for a few weeks. It's just so nice that Mom and Dad are able to help out with the expenses," she said, casually sipping her drink like it was no big deal. Chris chimed in too, talking about some wedding expenses that were covered for him. "I don't know what we would have done without that $200,000, honestly," he said, all nonchalant. And then there was Emily, laughing about how glad she was that tuition hikes didn't affect her, thanks to our parents covering everything. I just sat there trying to focus on my plate, but it was like their words were drilling into my brain. It wasn't just the money. They had been handed their futures on a silver platter. Meanwhile, I had to claw my way up and take out loans to get by. Every dollar felt like a struggle, while they acted like they didn't even have to worry about it. And the worst part? No one even seemed to notice I wasn't part of the conversation. I could feel my frustration building. My face got hot, my hands were clenched under the table, and I couldn't keep it in anymore. So I muttered something under my breath. Must be nice. The room went quiet. All eyes were on me. Sarah was the first to speak. "What's that supposed to mean, Michael?" She had this mix of confusion and annoyance on her face, like she couldn't even begin to understand why I was upset. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my cool, but it all just came out in a rush. "It means that not all of us get everything handed to us on a silver platter. Some of us actually have to work for what we need." I could tell they didn't get it. Chris just shrugged and leaned back in his chair like it was no big deal. "Michael, you're always acting like you're the victim," he said with that smirk of his. "Didn't Mom and Dad help you get those tools for work?" That hit a nerve. Sure, they gave me $7,000, but when I thought about everything they'd done for Sarah and Chris, it felt like crumbs. Yeah, they helped, But $7,000 compared to hundreds of thousands? It's not the same, and you know it. Mom tried to smooth things over as usual. Michael, we thought that's what you needed. We've always tried to give you what was fair. But how is $7,000 fair when you're handing out hundreds of thousands to the others? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Fair? You think this is fair? You've given them everything. You've practically paved their roads for them. I've had to build mine brick by brick. The conversation spiraled from there, with everyone trying to defend themselves, trying to make it seem like I was just being dramatic. You're blowing this out of proportion, Dad said, shaking his head. We gave you what you needed. Needed? No. They gave me the bare minimum. That's the part that hurt the most. They didn't care about what I wanted, only what they thought was enough to keep me quiet. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and left the room without another word. Their voices trailed behind me as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. I was done being the forgotten one, the one who always got the leftovers. When I stormed out of the house that night, I was fuming. I don't think I've ever been that mad. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to break free, and every step I took down the driveway, it felt like the world was closing in on me. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get away. Far away. It was late, probably close to 10 p.m., and the streets were quiet. You know that eerie kind of quiet where everything feels a bit too still? Yeah, that was it. The only sound was my shoes hitting the pavement as I walked. I didn't have my phone out or my headphones in. I wasn't in the mood for distractions. I needed to think. As I walked, the memories of that dinner replayed in my head on a loop. Chris's smug face, Sarah's condescending questions. It was like they were all living in this bubble of privilege and didn't even notice how suffocating it was for me. They were all in their happy little world, and I was just the outsider looking in. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I got. I kept asking myself, why didn't I say more? Why didn't I really let them have it? But then I realized no matter what I said, it wouldn't have made a difference. It was like talking to a brick wall. They had their version of events, and I had mine. And there was no way those two things were ever going to match up. I ended up walking to this park that I used to hang out in when I was a kid. It wasn't far from the house, maybe a 15-minute walk. There was this old bench near the playground, kind of hidden in the corner by some trees. It was one of those places you go when you just need to get away from everything. And that's exactly what I needed. I sat down, leaning back against the cold wood, and just stared up at the sky. It was one of those clear nights where you could see all the stars. Normally I'd find it calming, but that night it didn't help. All I could think about was how unfair everything was. How I'd spent my whole life trying to measure up, only to be left with scraps while my siblings were given everything on a silver platter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a second I debated not looking at it. But curiosity got the best of me, so I pulled it out. Of course, it was a text from Emily. Michael, where did you go? You need to come back. Let's talk about this. Talk. Yeah, right. I'd heard that before. Talking never fixed anything in my family. It was always the same old story. Mom and Dad explaining why things were the way they were, and me being told to just accept it. But this time, I wasn't in the mood for more excuses. I didn't respond to the text, just shoved my phone back in my pocket. I wasn't ready to deal with Emily, or any of them for that matter. I needed time to cool off and think things through. Sitting there, I started to go over everything in my head. The years of being overlooked, the moments when I felt like an afterthought. I mean, sure, I wasn't a perfect kid, but I didn't deserve to be treated like I was less important than the others. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about being seen, being valued. And for whatever reason, my parents had decided that my dreams, my needs, didn't matter as much as Sarah's or Chris's. I kicked a rock with my foot, watching it roll across the playground. I couldn't stay out there forever, even though the idea of never going back to that house was tempting. Eventually, I had to figure out what I was going to do. But for now, I just needed to be alone. I don't know how long I sat there, but after a while, the cold started to creep in. Fall was just around the corner, and the nights were getting chillier. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, feeling the wind cut through the thin fabric. I thought about heading home, but the idea of walking back into that house, facing them after everything that had happened, felt unbearable. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Emily's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a moment, considering whether or not to pick up. Part of me wanted to just ignore it, but another part of me thought, maybe she actually gets it this time. I hesitated for a few more seconds before finally swiping to answer. Michael, where are you? Emily's voice came through, calm but with that usual hint of superiority that always grated on my nerves. "Doesn't matter," I replied, my voice flat. "I'm not coming back tonight." "Come on, you're being ridiculous. We're family. We need to talk this out," she said, like it was that simple. "Talk?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You mean like we always do, where I get told why I should be grateful for what little I get, and you all pat yourselves on the back for being such great siblings?" "That's not fair," she shot back. "We didn't know you felt like this." "How could you not know?" I said, my frustration rising again. "Every time we sit down as a family, it's all about you, Sarah, and Chris. You get the trips, the houses, the weddings, and I get left with whatever's left over. I'm sick of pretending it doesn't bother me." There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear her trying to come up with something to say, something that would make everything better, but nothing came. "Look, maybe we haven't seen things from your perspective," Emily finally said, her voice softer. "But running away like this isn't going to solve anything." "This isn't about tonight, Emily," I said, rubbing my temples. "This is about every time I've been left out, every time you guys got to live your best lives while I was stuck trying to make ends meet. I needed help too, and all I got was a toolbox." She didn't say anything for a while, and I could hear the faint sounds of the house in the background. Laughter, dishes clinking, like nothing had even happened, like I didn't matter. "Just come back," she said eventually. "We'll figure it out, okay?" But I wasn't ready to figure anything out, not with them. Not yet. "I need time," I said, before hanging up and shoving my phone back in my pocket. I leaned back on the bench and stared at the stars again. It was going to take more than just a conversation to fix this. They didn't understand, and maybe they never would. But at least for tonight, I wasn't going to be the one sitting quietly, pretending everything was okay. I didn't sleep much that night after walking out of the park. When I got back to my apartment, my mind was still racing, and the weight of everything that happened sat heavy on my chest. I just lay there in bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying the dinner over and over again. No matter how many times I went through it in my head, I couldn't figure out how it got to this point. How was it that my own family could be so blind to everything I'd been dealing with for years? I mean, I get it, they were busy with their own lives, but was it really that hard to see how unfair things had been? As the hours ticked by, I started thinking deeper about what had happened. Not just at dinner, but everything that led up to it. All the years of being left out, all the moments I'd brushed off as no big deal when really they had been building up. One on top of the other. I realized that this wasn't just some one-time thing. This had been going on for as long as I could remember. It wasn't just about the money. Sure, the financial stuff hurt, but it was more than that. It was about how I'd been treated, how I'd always been the one who had to fend for myself while they were being taken care of. I was the one who had to figure things out on my own. And honestly, it wasn't even like I wanted their help. I just wanted them to see me, to acknowledge that I existed, and that my life mattered just as much as Sarah's and Chris's. As I lay there in bed, staring into the darkness, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. I mean, I was still frustrated, but the fire I'd felt earlier had simmered down. Instead, I felt this deep sense of exhaustion. Like I was just tired of it all. Tired of trying to fight for a place in a family that seemed to have decided long ago that I wasn't worth the same attention as my siblings. I don't know what time I finally fell asleep, but when I woke up the next morning, everything felt a little clearer. Not easier, just clearer. I knew that nothing was going to change unless I made it change. They weren't going to suddenly wake up one day and realize how unfair they'd been. It was up to me to make them see it. The problem was, how? I wasn't even sure where to start. Part of me wanted to just cut ties completely and go on with my life. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the answer. As messed up as things were, they were still my family. I didn't want to walk away from them, not entirely. I just wanted things to be different. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time that morning, staring out the window at the empty street below. It was early, barely past 7 a.m., and everything was still and quiet. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I'd tried to bring up these issues before, how I'd hinted at the unfairness only to be brushed off or told I was overreacting. But I wasn't overreacting. I just never had the chance to really lay it all out for them. That's when it hit me. The only way they were going to understand was if I showed them, plain and simple. I needed to spell it out in a way they couldn't ignore or argue against. Numbers don't lie, right? I wasn't sure if they'd listen, but at least they wouldn't be able to dismiss me as dramatic or jealous like they had so many times before. I spent the rest of the morning digging through old files, emails, bank statements, Anything that could help me make my point. I had receipts for the tools my parents helped me buy, but I also knew they'd helped Sarah and Chris with so much more over the years. I started putting everything together, organizing it all into neat little piles that told the story I'd been trying to tell for years. It wasn't easy. Going through all those old documents was like ripping open old wounds. I found emails where my parents had promised Sarah money for a down payment on her house, and then I found texts from my dad saying they couldn't really help me out with rent because they had already given a lot to Sarah that year. It stung. It really stung. But it also motivated me. This wasn't just in my head. I had the proof right in front of me. As I worked, my phone buzzed a few times. More texts from Emily, probably still trying to get me to talk it out. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to talk. I needed to be prepared first, and I wasn't there yet. I ended up working all day. By the time I finished putting everything together, it was late afternoon, and I was drained, mentally and emotionally. But I had something solid now, something I could take to them and say, look, this is what I've been dealing with. This is why I'm upset. It felt like a weird kind of victory, but not in a happy way. More like, okay, now they have to listen. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew they'd probably get defensive, especially Sarah. She always acted like she was entitled to everything she got, but I was ready for that now. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the pile of papers in front of me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of something. I wasn't just sitting back and letting things happen to me anymore. I was taking charge of the situation. Now, all that was left was to decide when and how I was going to confront them. I didn't want to do it over the phone or through texts. This needed to be face-to-face. But the thought of sitting down with all of them again after what happened at dinner made my stomach turn. It was going to be awkward as hell, but it had to be done. I knew they were planning another family dinner soon, something for Emily's birthday. The timing wasn't great. Who wants to ruin a birthday? But honestly, when was there ever a good time to bring this stuff up? There wasn't. And I wasn't about to wait around for another year hoping things would magically get better. So that was it. I'd confront them at Emily's birthday dinner. It wasn't going to be pretty, and it definitely wasn't going to be easy, but it was time to stop pretending like everything was fine. I wasn't going to be the forgotten one anymore. When the day of Emily's birthday dinner rolled around, I was nervous. I had everything ready. Every document, every piece of evidence that showed just how much my parents had favored Sarah and Chris over me. But knowing I was about to walk into a situation that was going to be awkward, uncomfortable, and probably end with a lot of yelling, didn't sit right with me. I wasn't trying to ruin Emily's birthday, but there wasn't exactly a perfect moment to do this. It had to happen, and it had to be soon. I got to my parents' house a little early, probably to give myself time to calm my nerves. When I walked in, everything seemed normal, like nothing had happened a few nights ago at that disaster of a family dinner. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on dinner, and Dad was out back, grilling something on the BBQ like he always did when the weather was nice. Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to what was about to go down. She looked up when she saw me and gave me a smile. "Hey Michael, you good?" she asked, like everything was fine between us. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't fine though. My heart was racing and I could feel the folder full of documents tucked under my arm like it was burning a hole through my shirt, but I had to keep it together. Sarah and Chris showed up not long after, laughing and chatting like they hadn't noticed anything wrong either. It was amazing how easily they just moved on from things. Meanwhile, I'd been carrying the weight of all this crap for years, and it was finally about to explode. We sat down to eat, and for the first 20 minutes or so, it was the same as always. Mom asked about work. Sarah talked about some upcoming vacation with her husband. Chris made a joke about how he still couldn't believe how expensive weddings were. I sat there, barely touching my food, waiting for the right moment. And then it came. After we'd finished eating and everyone was settling into dessert, I put my fork down and cleared my throat. "I need to talk to you all," I said, my voice sounding way more confident than I felt. Everyone looked up at me, confused. Dad raised an eyebrow. "What's up, Michael?" I took a deep breath and opened the folder, pulling out the first set of documents. I've been thinking a lot about what happened the other night, and I realized that I've never really laid it all out for you guys. I've been carrying this around for years, and it's time I showed you why I feel the way I do. Mom looked concerned, glancing at the folder. "Michael, can't we just enjoy the evening? It's Emily's birthday." "I know," I interrupted, trying not to let her guilt me into backing down. "And I'm sorry, but there's never going to be a good time to do this. I need you all to listen." I stood up and walked over to the living room, hooking my laptop up to the TV. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I clicked through the folders on my desktop, pulling up the presentation I'd spent days putting together. It wasn't fancy, just a slideshow with numbers, dates, and pictures of the documents I'd gathered. The first slide was simple, a chart comparing how much my parents had spent on each of us for education. Sarah's name was at the top, followed by Chris, then Emily. My name sat at the bottom, with a number that was embarrassingly low compared to the rest. "What's this?" Chris asked, leaning forward on the couch. "This is what I've been dealing with," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my hands were shaking. "This is how much you spent on Sarah's college tuition. And this," I clicked to the next slide, "is how much you spent on Chris's graduate degree. And here's Emily's, all her student loans covered." I paused for a moment, letting the numbers sink in. Sarah and Chris exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one said anything yet. "And this," I said, clicking to the final slide, "is how much you gave me. $7,000 for tools, that's it. No tuition help, no house down payment, no wedding fund, just $7,000. The room was silent. I could see the wheels turning in their heads as they processed the numbers. Mom looked like she was about to cry and Dad was frowning, clearly not happy with where this was going. "Michael," Mom started, but I cut her off. "I'm not saying you didn't help me," I said, trying to stay calm. "But you can't sit there and tell me this is fair. Look at the difference. You gave them everything they needed to get ahead, and I got leftovers." Dad sighed and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "We gave you what we thought you needed, Michael. You didn't ask for help with school." "I didn't ask because I knew you wouldn't offer," I shot back. "And I shouldn't have to beg to get the same support Sarah and Chris got. You just handed it to them. You didn't even think twice." Sarah, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. "Michael, why are you bringing this up now? We never knew you felt this way." "Because every time I've tried to bring it up, you've all brushed me off," I said, my frustration creeping into my voice. "Every time I've hinted that maybe things aren't as fair as you think, you've told me to stop being dramatic or that I should be grateful for what I got. But it's not about the money. It's about how you've all made me feel like I don't matter as much as you." Emily looked down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable with the whole thing. "I didn't know it was this bad, Michael," she mumbled. "That's the point," I said, clicking off the presentation. "None of you knew because none of you bothered to look. You were all too busy living your perfect lives, and I was just there, trying to keep my head above water." There was a long pause after that. Mom wiped a tear from her eye, and Dad was still frowning, but no one argued. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said, breaking the silence. "I just wanted you to see what I've been dealing with. I wanted you to understand why I feel the way I do." The room stayed quiet, and I could feel the tension in the air. No one knew what to say, and honestly, that was fine with me. I didn't need them to say anything. I just needed them to see. After my presentation, I could tell no one really knew what to say. The air was thick, like the tension had just doubled, and everyone was stuck in their heads trying to figure out how to respond without making things worse. Honestly, I wasn't expecting an immediate apology or some big resolution right there at the table. But I had hope for something. Maybe some acknowledgement that what I'd been feeling wasn't all in my head. I sat back down, my heart still racing. I could see my mom fidgeting with her napkin, her eyes darting from one of my siblings to the next, trying to gauge what everyone was thinking. Dad hadn't said much since the presentation started, but I could tell he wasn't happy. His arms were crossed, and his jaw was clenched like he was trying to keep himself from saying the wrong thing. Classic dad move, hold it in until he explodes later. Sarah finally broke the silence. "I didn't realize it was that bad," she said softly, her voice sounding more serious than I was used to. She didn't look at me though, just kind of stared down at the table, poking at the remains of her cake. I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't realize? Come on, Sarah, it's not like this is new. I've been dropping hints for years, and every time I brought something up, it got brushed aside." She glanced at me for a split second before going back to her cake. "I don't know. I guess I don't know." It wasn't much of an answer, but at least she was saying something. Chris, on the other hand, still looked annoyed, like I'd just ruined a perfectly good evening with all my drama. "Michael, I get that you feel like you've been left out or whatever, but we all got what we needed," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I mean, I worked hard too. Just because Mom and Dad helped me out doesn't mean I didn't put in the effort." That hit a nerve. Effort? Are you serious, Chris? "I'm not saying you didn't work hard, but you didn't have to struggle the way I did," I snapped. "You always had a safety net. Mom and Dad were there for you every step of the way, making sure you had everything you needed. Meanwhile, I was scraping by, trying to figure things out on my own. It's not the same, and you know it. Chris shrugged, like he still didn't get it, or didn't care to. It's not about effort, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. It's about how you guys got handed opportunities I never had. It's about the difference between me having to hustle just to get by, while you had the luxury of focusing on your dreams without worrying about rent or bills. Emily, who'd been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up. Michael, I'm sorry. I really didn't know you felt this way. I didn't even think about the money side of things. I sighed. That's the thing. No one thought about it because it wasn't affecting you. It's easy to ignore something when it doesn't directly impact your life. She nodded, looking a little guilty, and for a moment I thought maybe she actually got it. Maybe they all did, at least a little, but I still wasn't convinced. Dad cleared his throat, and we all turned to him. He'd been so quiet I'd almost forgotten he was sitting there. Michael, your mom and I, we never meant to make you feel this way, he said, his voice slow and careful, like he was picking each word cautiously. We thought we were doing what was best for all of you. I could feel the frustration bubbling up again, but I bit my tongue. I needed to hear him out. We gave Sarah and Chris what they needed for school because that's what they asked for. You, on the other hand, you never really asked for much. You always seemed so independent, like you didn't want our help. I blinked at him, not sure if he was being serious or if he just didn't get it. Dad, I didn't ask for help because every time I tried, I was told there wasn't any money left, or that you'd already done enough for me. What was the point of asking if I knew what the answer was going to be? Mom jumped in at that point, her voice softer, almost pleading. Michael, we did what we thought was fair, based on what each of you needed at the time. Maybe we didn't realize the gap was so big, but we were trying to do our best. I shook my head, rubbing my temples. It's not just about the money, Mom. It's about how I've been made to feel like the odd one out my entire life. You guys were so wrapped up in making sure Sarah and Chris were taken care of that you didn't even notice I was struggling. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was just asking to be seen. The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could tell my parents were processing it, trying to figure out how to respond. Dad let out a long sigh, looking older than I remembered. Michael, we never wanted to make you feel like you didn't matter. We love you. You know that, right? I nodded, but it felt hollow. I know you love me, but love isn't just about words. It's about actions. And your actions have made it pretty clear where your priorities were. Mom wiped at her eyes with a tissue, her voice trembling as she spoke. We didn't mean to hurt you, Michael. We really didn't. I could feel my anger starting to fade, replaced by a dull ache in my chest. I wasn't looking to hurt them either. I just wanted things to be different. I wanted them to understand how much this had affected me, and I wasn't sure if they fully did. But at least the conversation was happening. That was something, right? Sarah cleared her throat, breaking the silence. I think we need to figure out a way to make this right. It's not fair that Michael's been left out, and we can't just ignore that. Chris nodded, though he still didn't look happy about it. Yeah, maybe we can figure something out. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance, and for the first time in a long time it felt like we were all on the same page, or at least heading in the right direction. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. This wasn't going to fix everything. Years of feeling like the forgotten one in my family weren't going to disappear overnight. But maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something better. After that last family dinner, I told my parents and siblings that I'd had enough. I was done being the afterthought, done being the one who always had to accept less while they got more. I remember sitting there, telling them that I planned on talking to the rest of the family about it. I wanted to hear their opinions because honestly, I was curious if anyone else had ever noticed how I'd been treated. That's when my dad, of all people, turned to me with this cold look on his face. Michael, you should just be happy with what you got, he said. If you don't like it, then maybe you should leave. That hit hard. I mean, I always knew where I stood with them, but hearing it so bluntly like that, it felt like the last nail in the coffin. So I did exactly what he said. I left. Not just that night, but for good. From that point on, I decided to focus on me. I had wasted too much time trying to get their approval, trying to make them see me as an equal. It wasn't worth it anymore. I threw myself into my work, into building the life I wanted without them weighing me down. I knew I had potential, and I wasn't going to let their lack of support hold me back any longer. It wasn't easy at first. Walking away from your family isn't something you can just do without feeling some guilt. But the more I distanced myself, the more I realized how much energy I had been putting into trying to win their approval. I started to focus on my career, putting in the hours, and really grinding. And guess what? It paid off. A few years went by, and my life completely turned around. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My work was going better than I ever could have imagined. I started off small, just trying to make ends meet, but eventually I grew my business to the point where I was hiring more employees. I had a full team working for me, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd built it all on my own was something I'd never felt before. And here's the thing, I didn't just get by, I did really well. The kind of success that made me look back at all those times I felt like I wasn't good enough and laugh. I had clients coming in from all over, and I was making connections that I never thought I'd have. I guess, in a weird way, walking away from my family pushed me to prove that I could make something of myself without their help. But just as I was settling into this new phase of my life, I got a call. It was from my mom, which surprised me because we hadn't talked much since I left. My phone buzzed and her name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I debated ignoring it, but something in me decided to pick up. "Michael, we need to meet," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. There was something in her tone that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual, "we need to talk" guilt trip I had gotten used to over the years. It sounded desperate. I hesitated. Meeting with them wasn't something I really wanted to do, but curiosity got the better of me. So, after some back and forth, we agreed to meet at a cafe. When I walked in, they were already sitting at a small table near the window. They looked different, tired, older. My dad, who always had this confident, almost arrogant posture, was slouched in his chair, looking more worn out than I'd ever seen him. Mom had dark circles under her eyes, and she kept fidgeting with her cup, which wasn't like her at all. Something was off. "Thanks for coming," my mom said as I sat down. I didn't say much, just nodded, waiting for them to get to the point. After a moment of awkward silence, my dad finally spoke up. "Your siblings? They've cut contact with us," he said, his voice quieter than I expected. I blinked, not sure if I'd heard him right. "What do you mean?" "They don't talk to us anymore," my mom chimed in, her voice shaky. "Sarah moved away with her husband and she won't return our calls. Chris, he's distanced himself too. And Emily, well, we haven't heard from her in months." I sat there, trying to process what they were saying. It was hard to believe, honestly. Sarah, Chris, and Emily had always been the golden children, the ones who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Now they were the ones who had walked away. We're struggling, Michael," my mom continued. "Without them, we're really struggling. Financially, emotionally, everything." There it was. The real reason they wanted to meet. They needed help. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside me. A part of me felt like this was some kind of twisted karma. They had pushed me aside for years, ignored me when I needed support, and now they were the ones coming to me for help? The irony wasn't lost on me, but at the same time, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I wasn't sitting there thinking, "Ha, this is what you deserve." Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of all the drama, the years of resentment, the constant need to prove myself. "So, what exactly do you want from me?" I finally asked, keeping my voice steady. "We were hoping you could help us out," my dad said, avoiding eye contact. "We know things haven't been great between us, but we're really in a tough spot, financially especially." There it was, the money. I should have seen it coming. I looked between the two of them, wondering if they had any idea how ridiculous this all was. The same parents who had told me to be happy with what I got were now asking me for help because their golden children had ditched them. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I mean, you made it pretty clear a few years ago that I wasn't your priority. And now you're asking me to help you because Sarah and Chris don't want to?" They looked at each other, and for a moment, I saw something in their faces that I hadn't seen before. Regret. Real genuine regret. "We know we messed up, Michael," my mom said softly. "We should have treated you better. We didn't realize it until it was too late." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. There was a part of me that wanted to forgive them, to be the bigger person. But another part of me, the part that had spent years feeling overlooked and undervalued, wasn't ready to let go of all that hurt. "I'll think about it," I said, standing up to leave. "But I'm not making any promises." As I walked out of the cafe, I realized something. I didn't owe them anything, not anymore.